And I tend not to look backwards ever. Like, I don't have regrets. I've never had a regret in my life. I've done some stupid things. I've certainly made mistakes. But I've always felt those mistakes were iterative to get to the next thing.
What point did it turn from, okay, I'm helping Staples with their website or whatever, to like, this is likely going to be the career that I choose? Do you think you ever like got to a realization that you were going to work in tech?
No, I don't think so. I did it really as I needed income to pay for my rent.
In this episode, we speak to Pratap Gautam. Pratap's story is fascinating, and he's ended up working in some of the biggest companies on earth and been responsible for driving things that you all have used as consumers.
We built some interesting concepts at the time. One of them was actually onboarding.
Thanks.
Not as great as Detective.
I always say at the start of the episodes, I'm excited to get to know your story because I know a bit about it. Like I know like the recent history and like the magnitude of the jobs that you've had, which by the way, you're going to have to get used to taking compliments. But I know the magnitude of the jobs you've had, but I'm always, and the reason I do this is so fascinated to work out how it came to be. And of course, if it was actually the plan. So thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
On your first podcast, I believe.
Yeah, officially.
Woohoo! Okay, so let's go right back to the start. Where was school and did you enjoy it?
I grew up in the U.S. I grew up in middle of America in Oklahoma.
Does that make you an Okie?
It does.
Ooh, okay. Fine.
Yeah, and I actually went to the University of Oklahoma, but we'll get there in a second.
Yeah.
I grew up in the 1980s. Not a lot of diversity. So it was me and my siblings.
Did your parents move to?
My parents moved to India in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And there were very few Indians who moved to Oklahoma. Now, why? The backstory is my father moved as an engineer, and the University of Oklahoma happens to be a place where there's a lot of scholarships. Wow. They made it to Oklahoma. I often was asked the question, where are you from? And I would always snarkily answer, from my mother.
So you asked that, what, like when you were at school, people were saying, and you're like,
teachers
I've been here the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people, they're trying to get to the question of like, where's your people originally from, right? And, I'd inevitably say from India, and they'd say, oh, which tribe? Assuming Native American, right? School, I would say, probably was an interesting time as a kid growing up because I had my siblings around. I have a twin brother. I've got an older brother that's 18 months old and a sister that's 5 years older than I am. We were all like a pack, right? So for the most part, we were stuck together. So even if we didn't have like, extended amounts of friends, we had our own friends basically. And so I would say, look, academically, I think I did well as a kid. And it was probably too easy, which sounds bad, like, I was too smart or whatever. But I just think it was very rote. So, you had to memorize things and you had to spit them out. And I thought I was pretty good at that. And so I grew up in the middle of America.
Was there parental pressure to be good at school?
Oh, yes.
Did you notice at the time that was different to the, like the white American kids?
Yeah.
That they were getting less pressure from their parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's probably pretty typical of most Asian kids, if it's stereotypical or not. I think there's an expectation that you don't bring shame on the family, right? Yeah. And so you got to do good at everything you do, right? And so I think school was particularly important as a kid. My mom would always ask the question, like, why did you come home with a 90 out of 100%, right? Like, still an A, but not good enough.
Do you reckon that stayed with you?
I think probably in my early 20s, and I think I dropped some of that and realized good enough is good enough.
Oh, yeah. Good enough's better than most people as well.
That's true. That's true. And in some cases, how much do you spend energy to get to the same outcomes or nearly the same outcomes? And so I just became more efficient about just getting things done.
Yeah, nice. Do you reckon you, as you were going through like late teens and starting to make decisions about what was next, did you have any real passions that you thought this is going to be my career?
No. Not really. I mean, you're probably wanting this podcast to go to a different direction.
No, you're good. No, you're good.
But to be honest, I think it's rare for people to have a really good plan. I remember in my teens. There you go.
We all end up doing.
There you go. There you go, right? I actually, I'll get to that point. I think I went through, much like in the UK, right? Advisors and counselors in school, they give you these like exams and tests to figure out what are you really good at.
Yep.
I don't recall what I was good at the time. I don't think I was particularly good at anything, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But I did feel like science was an area that I gravitated to heavily in general, just because it was curiosity. And as a kid, I asked so many questions, right? I'd ask questions like, where's God? Like where? Not necessarily who or what, right?
Yeah.
I asked these questions and
Omnipresence isn't enough. I want to know where.
no, and I want to know details. I'm like, I've got thousands of questions when I get there, right? I think part of that was, my parents put in this aspect of curiosity was important, right? Asking critical questions. And so I'm not sure school was formidable for me in the mid-teens where I felt like that was what created where I wanted to go. I think still, I don't know where I want to go. I think it's part of life, right?
Yeah.
Where you want to end up going. It's a journey, right?
Yeah.
There's a constant change.
So you don't really know, but you end up going to university anyway?
I did
Was
go
it
to
straight
university.
from high school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I graduated high school at 17.
Was that because they put you forward a year because you were smart, or?
I wanted to get out of high school. I just moved when I was 15 to another city. We had moved as kids.
Was that to follow your dad's job?
My father had passed away when I was 15.
Did he? Okay.
And so my mom wanted to create a bit more stable atmosphere for me and my siblings. And so we moved to suburbia, again, middle of America in Norman, Oklahoma, home of Oklahoma Sooners.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, I think for me, a difficult time in that I didn't acclimate to this new student population, right? These were affluent kids,
Yeah.
right? I was not an affluent kid by any means as a child. And so coming up to learning that was, I just wanted to finish school and just get into university and focus on what's the next thing. Right?
Do you reckon that's because you had an idea of what university was going to be?
No, I had
or
no
was it
idea.
just because you wanted to get out of what you were?
I think it was
what
that.
high school was.
To be honest, I felt like I was done with high school and I wanted to go do something else. So,
There's also the focus that universities, because at high school you're doing loads of different things, but at university you can go, okay, I'll do this thing. What was the thing you did at university? What was the thing you studied?
a lot. I think because I was so unfocused about what I wanted to do, right? In the US, you don't have to get focused until really your junior year of university. So the first 2 years are really you're taking electives and you're taking foundational programs, right? So I studied anthropology, I studied chemistry, I studied astrophysics, which I ended up going towards a degree on, biology, and philosophy.
Really?
And a minor in history.
So in the UK, you go to university, you pick the subject.
Yeah, we don't do that.
I
It's
didn't
different
know that.
programs.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. I think part of it, how can any child,
Agree.
few probably, how could most children have very deterministic idea of where they want to go in their life?
Yeah,
I think it's
one
tough.
of the issues I have with university.
I think it's
have
tough.
a load of debt and know exactly what you want to spend.
Yeah, you
that
mentioned
debt
that in your
learning.
last podcast.
Yeah.
I heard you're right. I mean, particularly now, right, as debt is even more of an issue for students going through. You're making six-figure investment on your education, and
At a whim.
at a whim, because like the standard story has been, if you get university, you get a job, and you become successful, blah 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 blah. Right, the things that have invested children to go towards a 4-year program.
So did you say that it was astrophysics
Yeah.
that you?
Yeah.
Dude, as somebody that would never even come close, dude,
Well,
I don't even know if I can spell astrophysics. Do you know what I mean? Like, what? Like, was that a proud moment? Like, could you go through and you're like, okay, now I'm at university and now I've done 5 or 6 things and now I've picked astrophysics. Was that a confidence builder or was it daunting?
It was tough. I mean, I wasn't the strongest in mathematics as a kid. And I think realistically, as I went through a couple of the courses, right, things like stellar dynamics and planetary biology, you start realizing it's a tough space and it's very limiting, right? There's very few people who go do careers other than in research.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in academia, right? That's your.
You're in
like,
academia.
almost- yeah.
And if you're lucky, you get to work at, some fabulous telescope that gets to observe the world in time at the Hubble, right? Hubble telescope at the time. So for me, it was, again, just curiosity. It was a science. It was a hard science. It was one that I felt, longer term, the discoveries of what happens in the universe are the most infinite possible, right? So there was nothing to end at that point.
So that's not what you've ended up doing, which we get.
Definitely not.
Like, do you think it was during like the later part of university that you were like, this isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think even so, the first 2 years, I kept switching my degrees, and I think I was trying to find an answer of what do I want to be, what do I want to become, and
That's really interesting. What you want to become rather than what you want to do.
yeah,
It's a really different thing.
yeah. I think I was very introspective even as a child. I
Yeah.
think even to this day, I mean, I switch between philosophy, and sometimes people are like, ground yourself a little bit, right? Yeah, what I wanted to do is felt insignificant. It was a question of what I wanted to be
Yeah.
more than that.
Did you share that? Did you share that was the conundrum that you were going through internally
Yeah.
with anybody around you?
No. Again, because growing up in a Asian household, you don't really talk about your emotional well-being, right?
That's the reason for
I
the
think that's
question.
changed a lot.
Yeah.
But
Not even with your twin.
no.
Really?
No.
And at this time, what was your twin doing?
I mean, we were both studying at the university, right? So
Okay.
he was going down his track, I was going down mine.
Yeah.
He ended up going down and studying anthropology
Really?
ultimately. But we diverged, as most twins do in your teens and 20s, because you want to be very different people.
Yeah.
And then later in life, we became very similar once again. I think, no, but I didn't share much, right? I think for me, I internalized, for me to become something, I had to actually go through the strife. I had to go through the struggle.
That's so astute. Because I know that because of some of the feedback we've got on the pod, that people that are at that sort of university stage listen to these conversations.
Yeah.
And the natural advice is talk to as many people as you can.
Right.
I crowdsource all my decisions because I don't know what's going on. I'll message 5 people and be like, I'm
Yeah,
thinking about
smart.
this. What do you reckon? Right. But at that stage, for you to say, actually, I'm not going to speak to anybody about this because I feel as though I need to get to grips with it myself, that's unique.
Maybe. I mean, I think it's better that people have outlets to voice, right? Because the better sum of many voices is better than one, for sure. I think I took a longer period of time to get to where I wanted to probably become.
So
something.
did you have to make a decision at the end of university about what work was, or did you take some time out? How did you play that next step?
No, so I mean, I went through university. I ended up actually getting a communications degree, ultimately, because all of the science and those things were fascinating areas, but I never saw myself sitting at a desk and working on laboratory things. I ultimately wanted to become a genetics scientist, is where I wanted to go.
Wow.
And it's still a passion of mine, but it's a hobby. It's not.
Yeah.
Not that I'm, not doing CRISPR on my free time or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, communication was, no matter what you do, you have to be an effective communicator.
100%.
So I realized I was not really very good at that, particularly in my early 20s.
Was that because of setbacks that you received as a result of not being a good communicator?
No, I was observant, right? I saw really effective communicators, and I thought I wanted to do that better.
Okay. So you've ended up having this like illustrious career. How did you get from, so I've got two questions. How did you get from like not really knowing to like the throes of that? And at that time, because you have a thirst for the world.
Yeah.
Like you like traveling. I know that about you. Did you use that time to say, I'm going to see some of the world? And how much of the world did you see before? Like, how did those two things mix?
So, I mean, again, I think, people probably are rooted very early in life on the things that drive them, right? Probably a particularly young age, right? Very, very young. Curiosity was always this thing that I wanted to figure out. I wanted to figure out everything, right? As much as I possibly could. That's simply not possible, obviously. But you learn that later in life that the world is big. And so this idea of curiosity took me into different parts of, okay, I've done that, right? And I tend not to look backwards ever. Like, I don't have regrets. I've never had a regret in my life. I've done some stupid things. I've certainly made mistakes. But I've always felt those mistakes were iterative to get to the next thing. So, learning through university and then going into the workforce, I realized there was things that were, they were not by plan. I think there was a little bit of like I got a job offer for doing this tech thing. I was working in retail at the time, and I would get people who'd ask me, like, do you know how to build databases? And I'd say, sure. And I really didn't know what I was doing.
Well, so like you're working at a what
I was working
retailer?
at Staples at the time, right?
So
I was
you were
like,
working at
selling
Staples?
computers. Yeah. As part-time job while I was
Yeah, of course.
in uni. Yeah.
So somebody, like, there was a problem and they came to you and they were like, do you happen to know how to
yeah.
fix this thing?
Yeah.
And you did?
I had no idea what I was talking about.
Doesn't mean you didn't do it.
But I wanted the money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted the money, right? If you remember being in your early 20s, the thing that we least have is cash, right?
Yeah.
And so I was curious enough to say I could figure it out, right? And so I took these odd-end consulting gig things that people were coming at me with. And through referrals, I'd get more of these offers, right? Like websites were a big thing at the time, building websites. And so I was doing that and building a database back-ended. And I just uncovered this idea of tech and realized, wow, like this is another fascinating area of curiosity that I want to like spend my time on. And I did. So
That is like
it's stupid. It's not planned, right?
dude, the best things aren't. So you've gone. You're in Oklahoma. You've gone to high school.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty clever. I'm getting 90s. My parents are a little bit annoyed
Yeah.
that I'm not getting 100s, but I'm going to go to university. I'm going to do loads of really complex subjects, and then I'm going to do astrophysics, and then I'm going to get a communications degree. But then, because I'm being asked to build websites and create
I'm gonna
back-end
try this tech
services,
thing.
I'm going to try the tech thing, and that's how you ended up working in tech.
Yeah, so oddly enough, like I moved
so
from
good.
Oklahoma to Arizona, which is the desert of the United States, during this period of time before I was doing this tech thing. And I took a map out and I threw 3 darts at it. And I said, I'm moving to one of those darts. I wasn't dare enough to move across the world at this point. But and one of them happened to be Santa Barbara. I thought, I can't afford that. But I could afford Arizona. And so I did it. A month later, I moved.
How old were you?
19.
And you moved on your own?
Yeah. Moved on my own.
And what's paying for all of this?
I had savings. So at the age of 15, I started savings, like odd end jobs I would just save, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when did I'm going to help... Did you say it was Staples? No.
Staples.
So at what point did it turn from... It's amazing. Turn from, okay, I'm helping Staples with their website or whatever, to like, this is likely going to be the career that I choose. Do you think you ever got to a realization that you were going to work in tech?
No, I don't think so. I did it really as I needed income to pay for my rent.
Yeah.
And I needed income to kind of just get me through university days that I was, I needed food and I just needed something as expenses. So I wasn't sure at that time. I think, at that particular time in my life, I was just trying to figure out what could I do to make ends meet. And if it was interesting enough, I'd stay in it, right? I never was interested in what do I do? It was like, what do I need to do to be the next thing, right?
Yeah.
And so it was always about iteration. What is the next phase I need to get to?
This curiosity and iteration thing seems to be a constant.
It is.
I love it.
It roots me.
Yeah, I can tell that. So what was the first how long was it from there until the first job in the career that you've ended up having? Because you have had a career in space, right?
I mean, I have 27 years.
Yeah.
Long time.
Yeah. But how did that career start?
Someone offered me a job at a fintech, really small startup, and I got paid like pennies, right? Literally. And I did it, again, not because I needed the cash, but I thought at that point, I was just finishing up university. I really want to do this to learn the space. And I thought it was interesting that the folks I'd met, right, the 2 guys I'd met who interviewed me, said, look, we started this company literally off of, pennies, right?
I know how that feels.
Which effectively became millions to them over a couple of years.
I don't
right?
know how that feels. But
I mean, you're going through that journey, right? I think you will get to that for sure.
Yeah.
I think your determination is definitely... These guys had something very similar, right? Very determined to get to success, right? Whatever that meant at that time. And I wanted to be a part of this story of fintech. I didn't know what that meant, right? It was like 99.
at that time, fintech isn't really a thing.
Wasn't a thing, right? And I just thought, financial services, like so a bunch of finance folks and accounting, like that seems dry and boring. But they gave me this backstory, which was, you get to move millions of dollars a day and you get to touch tons of money I'm like, I'm 20 years old and you're asking me to touch millions of dollars. Like, fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Great. So what did the company do, and what was your
we
job?
used to build online banking front end applications for credit unions and community banks in the U.S. and websites for them.
When was that?
2000, I think.
So I speak to a lot of those credit unions now, and
Yeah.
I say your website and onboarding flow
Hasn't
hasn't
changed.
changed since then. So you did the
Probably.
ones that I'm now trying to change.
Probably. And they're just as horrible.
Yeah, but then it would have been amazing. Like, it hasn't.
It was
moved
forward-thinking at the
since
time,
then. It was
right?
forward thinking at the time.
Yeah.
Amazing. So first job in like your career,
What's that?
yeah, jack of all trades, doing a bit of everything because it's early
Jack of all
stage.
trades. I mean, I was doing a little bit of, and I was learning from guys who very guy centric, right? Particularly back then, there wasn't a lot of women in tech, unfortunately. I learned from some of the sharpest minds on Unix platforms, network engineering, running data centers, application development, and so as jack of all trades, I would help really run a small team. I would do application development. We'd build website applications. We'd answer phone calls. We would do everything, right? So it's like everything, like as you know, right? It's a startup,
Yeah.
right? You do everything. There's no such thing as a job, too lowly.
No.
You do it all.
Everything. So how did that end up? What happened?
I stayed there for about 2-3 years. We
Yeah.
went through an acquisition. I was given a chance to move.
Did you make some money in that acquisition?
No.
Oh,
No, in fact, I mean, I got some private stock, but it was a weird outcome. I mean, if I ended up holding the stock, I couldn't remain as an employee. I'd end up sitting on the board and get paid basically less than I get paid as my salary. And so I'm like, no.
Yeah.
So I'd moved. I stuck with the company. I moved to Colorado, which wasn't that far away. And I was in a bigger role, bigger company, right? And that was kind of my journey on moving to the next big thing.
Yeah. What was one of the questions I ask on almost every pod that we do is, what was the first job where you got a business card and you went, hell yeah, like I've made it now? Because there is in everybody's career,
It's
there is a
true.
time when you're like,
Well, you're really proud
shit.
of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Do people still do business cards?
No, but they did.
I remember that. It was this company, right? It was
So your second job,
my second job.
do you think that's because of everything you saw in the first job that made you so well-rounded? The next company were like, actually, we know exactly what to do with you, and here is a title that fits that.
Not really, right? I mean, I never really fit the peg, right? I mean, I kind of just like was always this square thing, underdog. I always liked that because
Yeah.
I never wanted to be characterized as that,
Yeah.
right? Whatever that was going to be. I ended up going into product. That was my real first role into product management, and they
What
gave
was
me a
product
business card.
management then?
Poor, right?
Yeah.
I think even today, right? There's a lot of good curriculum that's out there on the internet now, and even like some courses that are out there more professionally that are out there now. At the time, there really wasn't, and so it felt like more tech support. It felt more like you were doing special demos and
Yeah.
doing RFPs, RFIs,
Yeah.
and you were beaten down by the engineering team because they were like, how do you prioritize certain
Yeah.
things, and they didn't know what to prioritize, and so you end up being backlog management.
It's almost like a like tech operations to a certain extent more
Yeah.
than anything else, because you're not in the commercial, but you
Right.
support commercial. You're not in engineering, but you support engineering. So it's almost like this little.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a weird one. So you're in this role that's like a little bit. I'm not really sure, but it feels good because you got the
Well, they
business
gave me the business
card.
cards.
Exactly.
I got to go to conferences, right?
Business
I felt-
travel. The
I
first
felt
time you
big.
travel and the company pays
Yeah.
for it, you're like, whoa.
Oh yeah. yeah. And I was nervous, right? I'm like, what's my per diem?
Yeah,
Should
of
I not
course.
spend too much?
Dude, I still do the same today. Like, my CFO always goes crazy at me because he's like, you don't expense stuff.
Right.
Like,
Well, it's your company.
yeah, exactly. I don't know. I don't know. It's just I think you should be like that.
I think it's important, right? Because the penny that you don't spend is the penny that you can get back into building a business, right?
100%.
Even though I've never run a business, I've always felt the urgency of people are at your heels. And so for every pence or every penny you spend is something you can invest towards growth.
Yeah, 100%.
So for me, it's always been this thing about being wise about cash no matter what you're doing.
So you're in this job. How long did you stay in this one?
About 4.5 years.
Okay. That's a long time.
That is a long time.
At that age?
Yeah.
Because if you think you're, what, 21 to 25?
Something like that. 25.
The Pratap that finishes at 25 is very different to the Pratap that walked in at 21. What do you reckon the biggest changes were?
Oh, I grew up a lot, right? I mean, I also think you learn a bit of temperance about being patient with people, right? When you're 21, you believe you can conquer the world. Even when you're 25, you believe you can conquer the world. But you get a bit more settled in the reality that things are complex.
Yeah.
I think I became a bit more professional in the sense that there's banter you can have between your friends, there's banter you can have in the office, there's banter you can have with clients. And just learning that was important as you're coming up, right? From the first job to the second job. Again, like for me, it was about curiosity. Observing others and how they were managing decorum was important for me. And it wasn't, I'm going to follow the status quo, but like, what are the gray edges I can play on, right? And I've still to this day play on the gray edge quite a bit.
I think companies need people to play on the grey edge.
Yeah, otherwise it becomes too easy, right? And you get boring. You don't have that drive to do more, right? I think that's a big problem of large corporates.
Oh, yeah. I'm very nervous about the day if we ever become part of a large corporate, because you lose so much of what makes the company the company.
Yeah.
How did the next job come about?
So then I was more intentional, right?
Fine.
I wanted to. I was just getting married at the time, and my wife at the time wanted to move back to Europe and to be closer to her family, and I needed something that let me effectively transfer, right? So that was like my objective. It wasn't like, what am I doing? It was, what do I need to do to get to the next stage of life, right? And so. And by the way, nobody should take my advice on these things. I think it's unique, right? it's unique. I think people have to make decisions that kind of ground them on the things that root them, right? And for me, again, it was I needed to be in Europe, and so I went to Visa.
So
now I got
how did you do it?
offers.
Did you apply online?
So I was doing my MBA at the time, and a colleague of mine said, "Look, we've got openings. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Visa? Like, what are you, some quasi-government?" I had no idea what Visa was at the time, right? Because they were so phenomenally large. You thought, how could a company that's privately owned be that widely ubiquitous around the world, right? So I had no idea. He encouraged me to do that. I was also applying into places like Google at the time and PayPal at the time, and I actually had an offer from Google at that time.
So what's this, 2000 and...
This was in 2006, 2007 almost. And I turned down the Google job.
That's a bit like from just being in Staples building... It's for them to turn it down to Google job. That's a big leap, right? How did it feel to turn that down?
I felt good. I mean, I'll be honest. No, because I went to the campus in Mountain View.
Yeah.
I sometimes it's the nuances that turn you off on certain things. I met fellow Googlers who were in this round cycle, and they were all like cycling to somewhere. And I asked them where building so-and-so was at the time to find where I was doing my interview. And what struck with me was it felt like I was like in a cartoon. And it felt like Dr. Seuss book, like, you know, with people with hats and blue hair. And it's like, you know, it felt so asymmetric to what I knew that I just felt I can't fit into this culture.
Wow.
And maybe that's a very biased perspective.
No, it's just your perspective. It doesn't matter if it's biased
but
or not.
and it wasn't that I didn't feel like, look, I could adapt. I felt like this was so asymmetric to what I knew that I wasn't ready for that.
Interesting. Because it surprises me because of the curiosity that's defined so much of what you've done. It must have been really Dr. Seuss.
It felt like Dr. Seuss. And the other thing, it wasn't just Dr. Seuss. It felt like there was indoctrination. I'm not saying Google's doing that, but I felt at the time, my personal perspective on my first glance was, it felt indoctrinating. indoctrination, and I didn't want to be part of that. Right, I never wanted to be part of something that felt like you were subsuming your characteristic just to fit into a model.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, that doesn't suit
So I
you.
walked away from that, and I had Visa at the time, and I took that. Now the hiring manager at Google called me back and said, "Are you sure you really don't want to take this job?" And they offered me crazy amounts of more money, and I'm like, "No, a principle, right? If I make a decision, again, I don't look back. I tend to
good
just
for you.
move forward."
So you were at Visa for how long?
So I was at Visa for almost 5 years,
And what was your job title when you arrived?
director of something,
Okay, and what was your...
director of something as I left, risk and authentication when I
Okay,
left.
and when you left it was... Director.
No, so it was a director. I left as a director as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. Was it amazing?
Visa's a great company, I
Yeah,
think,
agree.
in general. You know, I had a really good mentor that was there. I mean, this guy built PIN debit, and he was...
Was that then acquired by Visa? Is that how he
No,
came
that
to
was...
be?
He was part of the organization. He was there for 30 years
Oh,
at
wow.
that time, right? He was one of the few originals that was there, and he gave me a lot of just one-on-one time early on my first year.
And this was your first job outside of the US as well?
No, I was still in the U.S.
Oh, so you went into...
So
so you were
I was
like, I
based in
want to move back, so
California.
I'm going to get a job in
That's
the US
right.
and transfer.
Correct. That's
Clever.
it. Yeah.
So you're in California,
In California.
but you know you're going to
Yeah.
try and move to London. How
Yeah.
long did that take?
So I joined in 2007. I didn't leave until 2011.
Oh,
So
wow.
4-ish years.
Yeah, yeah.
almost.
So you then do your first stint as a US national for a US company.
No, so I didn't transfer.
Oh, you
I
didn't
ended
transfer.
up not, because at the time in 2008, Visa became a public company. And it was the largest IPO at the time. And because of that, Visa Europe was split off as a
Oh,
franchisee.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which, and then I'm thinking, okay, like my plan didn't work out so well, right? It's not what I expected.
So did you then leave Visa to get a job in the UK? Was that
So I was applying around. I even applied to Visa Europe jobs at the time. I had gone through, some recruiter had contacted me for a job at American Express, and I went through the interview cycle. That took quite a long time, and
How many interviews?
I think I did 7 interviews.
Okay.
And
Could be worse, actually.
yeah, it definitely is worse now, right? And they gave me the option of working out of New York City or working in London.
Yeah.
And of course, London was attractive
Yeah,
for
you're
me.
like, ding.
So I did it. And I moved and I worked for American Express. And I was supposed to be part of their R&D team for product.
Okay.
Show up first day, job is no longer there.
What?
Yeah.
So, like, you've got your suit on at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you
Oh,
walk
yeah.
in, where was the office?
Well, I showed up in Belgrave House here in London.
Yeah. So you're like, woohoo! Like, shoes are polished. Like,
I'm brand new shoes.
you've got your brand new shoes on. Of
That's
course you
right.
have. Because it's your first job outside of the US.
That's it.
And it's a big job. Okay, so you walk in the door. I want to know exactly how this has played out. So you walk in the door and you go, hello, my name's Pratap and I'm starting work today and I'm
That's
starting
right.
for this job. And they're like, actually.
Well, I met my boss, and he says, we no longer have your job. It was displaced. But what do you know about mobile payments? I'm like,
Shut up.
again, right?
Did that really happen?
Swear to God.
But what do you know about mobile payments?
That's right.
Do you know what? One of the things in my career that
swear.
has amazed me is how bad a lot of big companies are when you lift the hood.
It's true.
How poorly organized, how
true.
mismanaged. But they've got this stuff that just makes them so much money that there's these areas
Yeah.
and pockets that are just a disaster.
That's true. They've got buffer, right? I think
Yeah.
small companies don't have the buffer.
If my company did that, it'd be done.
That's right.
If we drop the ball that badly on certain things, like...
Yeah, I mean, there's great books about, at some point, businesses get on this curve of, the tolerance for failure becomes paramount. And large companies tend to overlook things that they think, processes that don't form their ethos of who they are, what they do. And so those things become less important. The challenge, though, is onboarding a new employee is probably one of the most critical things you can do for any organization, because it's the first 60 to 90 days that are impressionable about whether they stay.
Yeah.
And whether they're really productive for the company, right? So you think about all the costs to bring on a new employee, and you have a poor onboarding experience.
So you've been in risk and identity at Visa, broadly speaking, but then mobile payments
That's it.
at Amex. So what happened? You were like, yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, part of my job at Visa was doing risk analysis for all new products, right? So I had a product background prior to doing that. Mobile payments was this like new thing that was happening at the time, right? 2010, 2011, at least for the Western world. And I had no idea what I was talking about. I think that's generally true in life, right? It's a question of like adaptation. And so,
but nobody at that time knew what they were talking about.
I mean, I would say there was a small plethora of people, right?
But there was a lot of
people
that were saying they knew more than they did.
Of course.
Or guessing about a
And I didn't make any allusions to like I was an expert in the space. I said I can figure it out.
Yeah.
And apparently that was good enough.
So can you give me some some actual examples, including some numbers of what ended up happening at Amex in the space that you were in? Like what did you achieve?
So if you remember 2011, right? There was no such thing as Apple Pay, right? Apple Pay is so ubiquitous now that people take it for granted. It's like it was always around, right? It wasn't. There was no such thing. We were tasked to go build mobile payments for the U.S. market. That was my key task, and then start, proliferating that across the world slowly. I had, through prior work at Visa, worked through standards bodies, PCI Security Standards Council, EMVCO. So I was very familiar with that. Why are you not using standards in American Express to develop your mobile payments, right? And so I had the fortune of working closely with a couple of really smart colleagues on how do we fast track our development to get to a shorter period of time. We had 6 months to get to live. And we had nothing.
So what you had to get live was being able to pay with an Amex on your phone.
Yeah.
See, now that's like duh.
Yeah, but there's a card emulation mode has to be developed, right? And there's a whole aspect to how to get your card physically on a secure way on a secure element. At the time, there was SIM card. So we were tasked to work with this company called ISIS, not the terrorist organization, but poor naming at the time. But it was Pay with ISIS. It was a collective of the 3 major telcos in the U.S. and on SIM cards. And so we had to build everything from scratch, right? Specs, applet, provisioning with our issuing business. We got up and live. I mean, I spent countless hours. I think these were days where I was working 80, 90-hour work weeks without a pause.
Yeah, I'm sure. So just to be completely clear, you've taken a job. The day you walk in, that job doesn't exist. You're asked if you know anything about mobile payments. Luckily, you know a bit. And in 6 months, you managed to lead getting mobile payments live for Amex.
Yeah.
Come on. That is amazing.
No, so that was a proud moment.
Yeah,
that was a proud moment.
I'm sure.
For sure,
You
right?
should be proud.
I mean, I got called from a guy who was in risk second week on the job and said, I mean, he basically said, "Who are you?" With a bit more explicitives and everything. Because I was very punchy. Like I realized there was a timeline we had to get to. We had to get to short order. We had to get it done. And I mean, his comment was, "You're going to fail." And I said to him, "There's no way I'm going to fail. I simply won't let it happen." And we didn't, right? I think sometimes grit takes you to an endpoint.
100%. That's all it takes sometimes. So I doubt you're the sort of person that revels in the glory for too long.
No.
So what happened next?
So, I mean, we launched in 46 markets. We didn't launch in one. Because my objective was if we're building on standards, we can deploy in multiple markets, right? So we did that over the course of the year following. We had a successful launch, obviously, in the U.S. That was quite tepid in the amount of like rollout that happened there. I think Google ended up buying Pay with ISIS. And that was its original foundation of Google Wallet, which we all know of now.
Jeepers.
Yeah.
Dude, that is
and so, but
amazing.
So I was also working on this new thing around tokenization at that time in Amex, as I chaired the EMV working group and set the standard for that. And that became the foundations for Apple Pay and mobile payments that we all know today. Yeah.
I love it so much. So you've done all this stuff, but what did you do then? Did you go back to Visa?
No, not at the time.
No. Okay.
Not at the time. So I was still at American Express. I was I was living in Poland at the time. Wife at the time, now ex-wife.
Yeah.
But at the time, we wanted to move closer to home, so we moved from London to Poland. We did about 2 years there, and I got a call from Microsoft. Met this gentleman who at a conference, and apparently loved me to the point where he said, "Why don't you come work for us?" I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what Microsoft was doing besides Windows. And 3 weeks later, he sends me a link and says, "Apply here." And literally on Microsoft's career website said, "This is the job for Pratap." And they had no job description. So I had no idea what I was getting in. I apply to the extent that there was an application required. I sent in my resume, CV, and got a call back a couple days later. And they flew me out to Seattle, Washington to interview with him.
What job did you do?
I ended up running product for them for their merchant business. So again,
Surely
payments.
throughout this, you're like, what is going on? Or were you just calm? Because I can imagine you were just calm about it. You're like, all right, cool. Like, yeah, we got Amex Payments Live, whatever.
No, it's pretty calm. There's very few things that probably startle me or like give me a shock, right? I think I was having a good time in my career where I realized that I needed to do something now. I did almost 5 years also at American Express.
Yeah.
I needed to go do something else to stretch where my brain was at the time.
So how was that? How was the job?
The job was good. Like I was there for almost 2.5 years at Microsoft. I think we did a lot of great things. The challenge with Microsoft, like many big organizations, is if you're not working on something worth $1 billion, it's not worth. They don't care, basically, right? To be quite honest. And maybe my Microsoft colleagues will find that to be abhorrent that I said that, but scale is important for them, right? These are businesses that if you don't achieve scale in a relatively short amount of time, they can put their investment dollars towards something else. And so, I think you lose impact when you're at a large organization like that because you realize you're just another cog in that wheel.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit disappointing. I realized I wasn't stretching where I was learning at that point. And so the iteration became, what am I really doing at this point in my career?
So what did you do?
I was called by a former boss at American Express who asked me to come join her at Visa.
Amazing.
Back at Visa.
Yeah, how did it feel to go back to... Because you also go back with very different
Yeah.
credentials.
I mean, I don't think I was wanting to do that, to be quite honest. I think part of it was I don't like to revisit old things. But she was very clear that she was building a whole new business. It was merchant focused. And I always felt like merchants have been the underdog in the payments ecosystem. They probably end up bearing most of the cost for underlying the ecosystem. And, they've got a hard business. Most of their margins are very compressed. And so I've always felt like being part of that was interesting.
So what was the job?
I was meant to join a team that was building brand new solutions for the merchant ecosystem and acquirers, those that serve merchants. And we would come up with new ideas and incubate them to the point that we would hand them off once we got them to scale, and then they would productionize the rest of it. So we built some interesting concepts at the time.
Yeah.
One of them was actually onboarding.
Thanks.
Not as great as detective.
There's the quote.
That's it.
But yeah, we. It's a hard thing to do in a big organization because there's so many people that want to be part of it because it touches so many things. I think we've got the benefit of just being able to focus and do it without any constraints or any pressures, and just ask as many people as possible what it needs to look like, and then we just do it independently. I'm gonna refrain from digging into business modeling because I don't want this to be about that. But was there anything at Visa that you got live that you were like, yep, really happy that happened, or was that a reason that you decided to move on?
No, we got some short wins for sure, right?
Yeah.
More than anything, I'd say, as a product person at that point in my career, I realized that learning was a much better aspect than getting the P&L and getting the product out. Obviously, those are things that you do as your job, but you realize that the conversations you get from your customers, your stakeholders, can be quite illuminating as to what I could have built differently or a completely different product that could have served them in a wider way. And so those are the things that, as I was looking back as I was leaving, realized that we had a lot of opportunity that we didn't go after.
Yeah, that's the hard thing when like those conflicting priorities and everything else, and trying to make your voice the loudest one. And there's these corporate animals and big businesses like that have their voice heard, right? When you're not one of those corporate.
That's
animals.
right. And sometimes you the things that you really want to work on because you see the obvious eye in the prize is some things that are not so obvious for your corporate overlords.
So you then left Visa, and your most recent role at Fiserv,
yes,
was
head of product strategy and M&A.
And did that scratch the itch that you didn't feel, or did that complete you in the way that the previous roles maybe hadn't at Microsoft and Visa?
I think so to a degree. I mean, everything comes with iterations, right? I think the next thing, whatever I end up doing next, will be probably on that iterative path. I learned definitely a lot of things at Fiserv, right? I think, again, the same thing with customers, right? Organization that is still growing with its discipline and rigor, right? You mentioned earlier, right? Large organizations, sometimes they do certain things right, and then sometimes they don't do certain things right. Everybody's going through a growth curve, right? I think part of my job is also supporting transformation of that organization. And we were the biggest business unit, still are the biggest business unit.
By the numbers, how big?
By the 53% of the overall company.
And the overall company is
billions. I mean, it's a publicly traded company. I don't want to forecast their number now, but they're doing phenomenally well.
Yeah,
it's a great company.
Yeah.
I think their challenge is much like big organizations, right? Is what is the next thing that they're going to build that differentiates them from somebody else?
Yeah, of course. Interesting. So I think we're getting close to time. So we typically do predictions on the industry, but I am gonna push you for a different prediction.
Okay.
And I'm gonna say, what is the top thing that the next role that you do has to give you?
Oh, impact for sure. Yeah, if you ask me like what's been missing in every aspect, every role that I've ever had was the level of impact. And I've contemplated, should I go do my own thing, just start my own company? That will obviously give you the biggest impact. This is one of the things that I sit with, right? Is impact is going to be the most important thing.
Do you think that is vastly different from the answer you'd have given in that first startup?
Yeah.
What do you think the answer then would have been?
Money.
Isn't it funny that over time it changes from money to impact? But partly because you've got money.
Maybe. I mean,
do you know what I mean? You could always have more, but
there's no doubt, right? There's a privilege in getting to a certain point where you realize you're not having to worry about paying the bills, and you're now thinking about those higher quadrant things and fulfillment.
I find it fascinating that actually, if people early in their career, even if they do have to prioritize money, if you actually prioritized impact, you'd probably end up getting
totally
more money. But it's a really hard thing to tell somebody in their early 20s, isn't it?
It's a hard thing to tell them, particularly if they're struggling to make their rent, right? But it is a thing I ground young people. Right? I've had the fortune of working with really young people in my teams, and I always tell them, right, stick with integrity and focus on the things that will give you the best outcomes long term, right? It's hard to figure that out, particularly at that age, because you don't know what to expect when you're going through anything, right?
Ironically, they should do what you didn't do and have some people around them.
Totally. I think it was a different time too, right?
Yeah,
trust is one of those things that when you, and I think as in my career, I've met some really good leaders that when you trust them, you can actually share and get insight from them, right? I don't think I had that at a very early age.
That's us. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
That was awesome.
And that concludes another episode of Not What I Expected. I hope you loved that as much as I loved recording it. If you like it, let us know. If you don't, tell us how you think it could be better. Thanks and see you again.